The ancient Greeks, a people of intellect and pride. They were pioneers in science, philosophy, and warfare. They built a vibrant culture that would later become a cornerstone of Western civilization. A prosperous society, far ahead of its time, yet constantly teetering on the edge of destruction. A true diamond beneath a collapsing roof. The story of the Greeks begins long before their grand temples were built, before anyone feared their power, and before nations even existed. Humans had lived in the region we now call Greece for tens of thousands of years. Before them, early human species like Homo erectus and Homo neanderthalensis also inhabited this land. These early people were hunter-gatherers, with primitive tools and nomadic lives. This era of Stone Age tribes gradually gave way to the Neolithic period, the final stage of the Stone Age. It began with the domestication of crops and animals in the Near East, and this agricultural revolution soon spread to the rest of the world. The earliest evidence of agricultural societies in Greece dates back around 9,000 years. During this time, the first Greek-speaking tribes arrived on the mainland. Their language was the predecessor of what would become the Mycenaean tongue, the first written form of Greek. Over time, the Neolithic era transitioned into the early Bronze Age, around 3000 BCE. Bronze began to integrate into the economy, and new cultures emerged, notably the Cycladic and The Cycladic culture is known for its abstract female marble figurines, while the Minoans, based on the island of Crete, built grand palaces such as Knossos. However, they also faced natural disasters, like the eruption of Thera in 1628 BCE. Eventually, these cultures merged into a new civilization, the Mycenaeans, who rose to prominence around 1600 BCE. They were the first truly advanced Greek civilization, capable of crafting intricate art, building organized cities, and developing a writing system. However, politically, they remained under the control of a warrior aristocracy, lacking a stable political structure. Around 1100 BCE, the Mycenaean civilization collapsed. Cities were destroyed, populations scattered, and Greece entered a dark age, marked by a decline in population and the loss of writing. The reasons behind this collapse are still debated, though many believe it was due to outside invasions. One possible culprit was the Dorians, one of the four major ethnic groups of ancient Greece. Viewed as uncivilized, they are thought to have invaded and seized Mycenaean lands, especially in the Peloponnese. These Dorian tribes eventually gave rise to one of history's most fearsome warrior societies, Sparta. In Greek mythology, the legendary Trojan War took place during this era. It began when Paris of Troy abducted Helen, wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta. The war became one of the most iconic tales in Greek mythology, featuring epic heroes like Achilles and Hector, and symbolizing both the heroism and brutality of ancient Greek warfare. The story of the Trojan War and its aftermath lives on through two epic masterpieces, the Iliad and the Odyssey. Both are traditionally attributed to the legendary blind poet Homer, though his actual existence remains a mystery. These works were written centuries after the events they describe and only cover brief segments of what was likely a much longer conflict passed down through oral tradition. While these epics are not historical documents, they are essential to understanding Greek mythology and identity. The tales of Troy, the Great Siege, and heroes like Achilles and Odysseus may be mythological, but to the ancient Greeks, they carried the same cultural weight as the Bible would in other civilizations, shaping values, beliefs, and a collective sense of purpose. Beyond myth and war, the ancient Greeks celebrated physical excellence and divine honor through the Olympic Games, a sacred festival dedicated to Zeus. Held in Olympia, these games were more than just athletic contests, they were a symbol of unity, faith, and cultural pride. At the heart of the event stood the colossal statue of Zeus, towering over 40 feet high, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. During the Olympic Games, all warfare would temporarily cease as city-states honored a sacred truce, allowing athletes to travel safely to compete. Events began with running, both sprints and long-distance races, and expanded to include more intense competitions such as armored races, boxing, wrestling, and the brutal pankration, a no-holds-barred blend of wrestling and striking, a kind of ancient MMA. But the Olympics were more than just physical trials. They were also intellectual gatherings. Thinkers, poets, architects, and scholars from across the Greek world would come to Olympia to share their ideas, innovations, and stories. Though the ancient games have long ended, their legacy lives on in the modern Olympic Games, where athletes from around the globe continue to honor the spirit of excellence. Meanwhile, far from Olympia, another Greek city-state was forging a very different identity, Sparta. Known as the land of warriors and slaves, Sparta stood apart in its rigid social order and relentless focus on military dominance. This unique system was said to be designed by the semi-mythical lawgiver Lycurgus, who shaped every aspect of Spartan life to prioritize strength, discipline, and loyalty. Spartan society was divided into strict classes. The Spartiates were full citizens, trained from birth to become elite soldiers. Perioikoi were free but had no political rights, while the Helots, state-owned slaves, formed the economic backbone of Sparta, farming the land and supporting the city's needs under constant surveillance. Every male Spartan citizen underwent the Harshagoge training program starting at age 7. They were taught to endure pain, survive in extreme conditions, fight with precision, hunt, sing, dance, and develop social cohesion, all designed to create the perfect soldier devoted to the state above all else. Sparta wasn't just a city, it was a war machine, built to conquer, survive, and instill fear in all who stood against it. And through this ruthless system, it became one of the most formidable powers in the ancient Greek world. But Spartan education wasn't limited to combat. It was a holistic system that combined both military and intellectual training. A single Spartan warrior may not have been stronger than other Greek fighters, but what gave them the edge was their ability to fight as one, in the deadly and disciplined phalanx formation. This rigorous training made Spartan infantry some of the most formidable units in all of Greece. Interestingly, Spartan women were also trained, physically and mentally. Unlike most women in the ancient world, Spartan women had more rights, more freedoms, and were even educated. They were praised for their strength, independence, and were considered some of the most beautiful women in the Greek world. To the north of Sparta stood another great power, Athens. With roots going back to the Mycenaean age, Athens had long been a hub of wealth and influence. Its iconic Acropolis was once the site of a Mycenaean fortress. The people of Athens were part of the Ionian group, one of the 4 major Greek ethnic groups. By the 6th century BCE, Athens was facing deep social unrest. This eventually led to reforms by the lawmaker Solon, which paved the way for democracy. In 508 BCE, Cleisthenes introduced a radical new system: every free male citizen would have an equal vote in public matters. This political revolution made Athens unique and attracted intellectuals from all over Greece. Philosophy, mathematics, science, and architecture flourished in this new democratic society. Athens was a city built for greatness. The long walls stretched from the Acropolis all the way to the sea, protecting vital trade routes and supporting one of the strongest navies in the Mediterranean. In 496 BCE, Athens used that navy to support the Ionian revolt against the mighty Persian Empire. They teamed up with the city of Eretria and managed to burn the Persian city of Sardis, but the victory was short-lived. In retaliation, the Persian king Darius swore vengeance. So serious was his anger that, according to legend, he had a servant remind him 3 times a day, "Master, remember the Athenians." Persia, one of the most powerful empires in the world at the time, was not about to let this challenge go unanswered. War was inevitable. The Persians first crushed the rebellious Ionian cities. Then they turned their eyes toward the rest of Greece. After conquering Eretria, they launched an invasion of Attica, landing their forces at the bay near the town of Marathon. Athens, joined by a small army from Plataea, rushed to intercept them. They blocked the 2 main exits from the plain of Marathon, choosing terrain that would prevent the feared Persian cavalry from engaging. The Athenians sent for help from Sparta, but the Spartans were in the middle of a religious festival and refused. More likely, they feared a Helot uprising if they left the city unprotected. Facing overwhelming odds, the Athenians, under General Miltiades, made a bold decision: they would not wait to be attacked. Instead, they launched a surprise assault. The Persian army, made up mostly of lightly armed archers and infantry, would soon find out just how deadly a determined hoplite charge could be. The victory at Marathon was more than just a military triumph. It sent shockwaves across the ancient world. For the first time, the Greeks had defeated the seemingly unstoppable Persian Empire. But this wasn't luck. General Miltiades used brilliant tactics. He weakened the center of his formation and reinforced the flanks. As the Persians pushed through the middle, the Greek wings curved inward and surrounded them. The Persian ranks broke into chaos. As they fled toward their ships, thousands were cut down. In the end, 192 Greeks had died, compared to a staggering 6,400 Persians. The first Persian invasion of Greece ended in humiliating defeat for the empire. But Darius the Great had no intention of giving up. He began assembling a massive new army to completely conquer Greece. That plan, however, was delayed when Egypt revolted in 486 BCE. When Darius died, his son Xerxes inherited both the throne and his father's ambition. Xerxes prepared for an invasion unlike anything Greece had ever seen. He gathered a colossal army and navy from every corner of his empire, from the mountains of Central Asia to the deserts of Arabia and the shores of India. The Greeks knew the invasion was coming and began preparing their defenses. This time, Sparta would join the fight. Roughly 1 in 10 Greek city-states formed a defensive alliance. Most remained neutral or submitted to Xerxes. But with Athens and Sparta united, a formidable coalition was born. The invasion began in the spring of 480 BCE. Xerxes led his troops across the Hellespont on a bridge of boats, then marched through Thrace and Macedonia into Thessaly. But to reach southern Greece, they had to pass through a narrow mountain corridor, Thermopylae, the Hot Gates. Thermopylae was a natural bottleneck. In some areas, the pass was only about 6 feet wide, in others, perhaps 50. It was the perfect place to block a massive army. And leading the Greek resistance was King Leonidas of Sparta, a warrior, not a politician. Leonidas wasn't born to be king. He only took the throne after his brothers died or were deemed unfit to rule. Unlike most princes, he had endured the brutal Spartan military training known as the agoge, becoming a true soldier. When the Persians approached, he handpicked 300 of his best warriors, each one a father, so their bloodline could live on, and marched to Thermopylae. They all knew they were marching to their deaths. But for Spartans, dying in battle was the highest honor. Alongside more than 7,000 Greek allies from the Peloponnese and other regions, they prepared to hold the line at the Hot Gates. Meanwhile, Athens prepared for a battle at sea. Themistocles, a brilliant general and a bold, non-aristocratic politician, had convinced the people of Athens to build a powerful fleet of 200 advanced trireme warships. His strategy was to block the Persian advance at sea while Leonidas held them off by land, buying Greece the time it needed to unite. Themistocles had been right. The Persian navy was coming, and soon the war would be fought both by land and at sea. While Greek ships gathered at Artemisium, on land, a legendary stand was about to unfold at Thermopylae. There, the Spartans faced overwhelming odds, an army of over 150,000 Persians. For 4 tense days, both sides waited. The Greeks repaired and reinforced an old wall across the narrow pass, transforming it into a strong defensive position. The Persians mocked the small Greek force, but they knew the battle would be costly. When Xerxes ordered them to surrender, King Leonidas famously replied, "Come and take them." By the 5th day, the Persians were low on supplies, they had no choice but to attack. Xerxes first sent waves of poorly trained, lightly armored soldiers. But the Spartans, protected by bronze armor and large round shields, slaughtered them. Day 1 ended with only a handful of Greek losses and tens of thousands of Persian dead. What made the Spartans so deadly was their phalanx formation, a wall of shields and spears nearly impossible to penetrate. Behind that wall, they wielded short swords with lethal precision. The Persian soldiers, with wicker shields and weak armor, stood no chance. Even volleys of arrows bounced off the Spartan bronze. On the second day, Xerxes sent in his elite soldiers, the immortals. So named because their ranks were quickly replenished, they wore heavier armor and fought in tight formation. But Leonidas outmaneuvered them. The Spartans pretended to retreat, drawing the immortals forward. Then, in a sudden counterattack, they destroyed them. By day's end, the Persians had lost over 10,000 men, but the tides of war soon shifted. A local named Ephialtes betrayed the Greeks, revealing a hidden mountain trail that would allow the Persians to outflank them. Knowing the end was near, Leonidas dismissed most of the Greek army. Only he, his 300 Spartans, and 700 Thespians remained, to hold the line, and to buy time. They stood firm, knowing death was certain. They fought with unmatched fury, cutting down wave after wave of Persians. Leonidas himself was slain, and his men battled to protect his body until they too were overwhelmed. Furious at the resistance, Xerxes had Leonidas' body mutilated and taken back to Persia, a rare break from Persian respect for brave enemies. Years later, his remains were returned to Sparta, where he would be honored forever. Thermopylae was technically a Persian victory, but a hollow one. Tens of thousands of their soldiers had died to defeat a few thousand Greeks. Across the ancient world, the stand at the hot gates became a symbol of defiance. With the Spartans dead, the Persian army advanced. Athens, now abandoned, was captured and burned. But the Greeks weren't done. A massive allied force took position at the Isthmus of Corinth, protecting the heart of the Greek mainland. And at sea, the tide was about to turn. Themistocles had one final gamble. He lured the Persian fleet into the narrow straits of Salamis. There, the large Persian navy became disorganized in the tight waters. Greek ships, smaller, faster, and expertly manned, struck with devastating effect. The Persians suffered a crushing defeat. Fearing encirclement, Xerxes retreated to Asia, leaving his general Mardonius to continue the fight. The next spring, the Greeks assembled their largest hoplite army yet. Marching north, they met the Persians at the Battle of Plataea. Once again, Greek discipline and heavy infantry triumphed. Mardonius was killed, and the Persian force collapsed. On the same day, across the sea, the remnants of the Persian navy were destroyed at the Battle of Mycale. With both army and navy defeated, the invasion was over. Persian dominance in the Aegean was shattered. From there, the Greeks went on the offensive, expelling Persian forces from Europe and reclaiming the Aegean islands. Twice they had stood against the greatest empire of their time, and twice they had won. Their courage earned them fame across the world. The next 200 years would be shaped by the victories at Marathon, Salamis, and Plataea. The classical Greek civilization was born. Though Sparta and Athens had fought side by side, their old rivalries would resurface. Still, for a moment in time, their unity helped forge a legend, one that would echo through history. After defeating the Persian Empire, Greece entered a golden age, with Athens at its center. To protect the Greek cities in Asia Minor and guard against future invasions, Athens founded a military alliance known as the Delian League. Though originally created for defense, within just a few decades, the alliance had transformed into what was essentially the Athenian Empire, with over 300 member city-states. Athens quickly grew in wealth and power. Trade flourished, not just with other Greek city-states but across the entire Mediterranean. In just one generation, Athens had become a dominant force and a shining example of successful democracy. That prosperity was most visible on the Acropolis, a sacred hill in the heart of Athens. After being destroyed by the Persians, the ancient temples were rebuilt under the leadership of Pericles, with a massive budget equivalent to billions of dollars today. The most famous was the Parthenon, which housed a towering 40-foot statue of the goddess Athena, covered in gold and ivory, inlaid with precious gems, a symbol of Athens' wealth, beauty, and power. This was also a time of intellectual and artistic brilliance. Anaxagoras, a philosopher and astronomer, discovered that moonlight was reflected sunlight. Herodotus, known as the father of history, began writing accounts of past events using logic and reason instead of myth. Playwrights like Sophocles and Euripides revolutionized theater with their tragic dramas. Thales of Miletus used math to calculate the height of the Egyptian pyramids and encouraged a rational view of the world over superstition. And Socrates, one of the most influential thinkers in history, laid the foundations of Western philosophy, exploring the human mind alongside his students in a time of enlightenment. But peace didn't last forever. As Athens grew stronger, so did its ambitions. It continued aggressive campaigns against a weakened Persia and tightened control over the other city-states in the Delian League, turning allies into tributaries to fund its powerful navy, the core of Athenian dominance. This rise in Athenian power triggered growing resentment from Sparta. Although a peace treaty had been signed, tensions lingered beneath the surface. When Athens rebuilt its city walls, bigger and stronger than before, Sparta saw it as a threat. And when Sparta asked for help with a massive slave revolt, Athens sent 4,000 hoplites, only to be turned away while other Greek forces were allowed to stay, a public insult. The Cold War was heating up. In 459 BC, Athens took advantage of a conflict between Megara and Corinth, both Spartan allies, and gained a critical foothold on the Isthmus of Corinth. Its powerful navy also bullied the weakened Corinthian fleet, stirring unrest in its colonies. These moves sparked the First Peloponnesian War. The first major battle was at Tanagra in 457 BC. While not decisive, it taught the Athenians a valuable lesson: they were no match for Sparta's elite infantry on land. After several minor battles, both sides agreed to a 30 years peace, temporarily ending the conflict. But this wasn't just Athens versus Sparta. It was nearly all of Greece, divided into two great coalitions, and the true war had only just begun. But peace was fragile, and it wouldn't last. In less than 15 years, war returned. Corinth, frustrated by Athens' dominance over sea trade and its mighty navy, persuaded Sparta to reignite the conflict. The Spartan army, famous for its unmatched land power, marched into Athenian territory, burning farmland and villages as they advanced. They wanted a decisive battle on open ground, but the Athenians refused to leave their fortified city. Athens was prepared. Behind its towering stone walls, including the famed long walls that stretched all the way to the port of Piraeus, the city could survive sieges and continue importing grain from Africa. Under the leadership of the brilliant Pericles, Athens adopted a new strategy: use its navy to strangle Spartan trade, raid coastal allies, and avoid full-scale land battles. For a time, the strategy worked. But tragedy struck when infected grain shipments brought plague into the overcrowded city. Disease spread rapidly, claiming the lives of nearly a quarter of the population, including Pericles himself. Without his steady leadership, Athens became more aggressive. The survivors launched attacks along the Peloponnesian coast and even built fortresses to encourage Helot slaves to escape from Sparta. Another attempt at peace was made, but failed. Athens was desperate for a new advantage and turned its eyes westward. The wealthy city of Syracuse in Sicily controlled key trade routes in the Mediterranean. If Athens could conquer it, they could control the sea. So they launched one of the largest expeditions in Greek history, over 10,000 hoplites and most of the Athenian fleet. But poor leadership and internal disagreement doomed the campaign. The expedition collapsed, thousands were killed, the navy was devastated, and Athens lost not just ships, but the skilled oarsmen who powered them. Back home, disaster continued. 20,000 slaves escaped from the silver mines, and member states of the Delian League refused to send funds. Meanwhile, Sparta made an alliance with Persia, receiving gold to build a navy of its own. With their new fleet, Sparta gained control of the seas and cut off Athenian trade. Eventually, Athens was forced to surrender. Sparta had won, but victory came at a great cost. Much of the Peloponnese lay in ruins, and Sparta, once feared and respected, was now a hollow shell of its former self. Into this power vacuum rose a new force, Macedon. In 382 BC, Philip II was born, the youngest son of a minor Macedonian king. Held as a hostage in his youth, Philip learned the arts of diplomacy and war from his captors. When he returned to Macedon, he seized the throne and began a bold campaign of military reform and conquest. Philip's greatest innovation was the Macedonian phalanx, a formation of tightly packed soldiers wielding long spears called sarissas. Supported by light infantry, cavalry, and archers, this new army was flexible, deadly, and unlike anything Greece had seen before. Through marriage, diplomacy, and military might, Philip gained control of northern Greece. In 356 BC, his son Alexander was born. By 353 BC, Philip had conquered Thessaly and most of central Greece. Though he made no direct war with Athens, his ambitions were clear. Eventually, Philip sent a message to Sparta: "You are advised to submit without further delay. If I bring my army into your land, I will destroy your farms, slay your people, and level your city." Sparta replied with a single word: "If." Philip did not attack, perhaps not out of fear, but because his focus had already shifted east. He had unified nearly all of Greece, and now his eyes turned to the Persian Empire. In 336 BC, during a royal celebration, Philip was assassinated, killed by one of his own guards. The killer fled but was caught and slain. The reason remains a mystery. But one thing was clear: with Philip gone, power passed to his 20-year-old son, Alexander. A man who would soon become more than just king. He would become a legend. Alexander is one of the most renowned figures of the ancient world. His birth is shrouded in legend. His mother, Olympias, was the fourth wife of King Philip II of Macedon. Though not his only wife, she held the role of principal consort for a time. From the very beginning, stories about Alexander were steeped in myth. Some claimed that Philip was not even his true father, that Zeus himself had fathered the child. On the day Alexander was born, the temple of Artemis, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, burned to the ground. Some believed the goddess had left her temple to witness the birth of the future conqueror. Alexander was raised as a noble Macedonian youth, learning to read, hunt, ride, and fight. When he was just 10 years old, a trader brought a wild horse to King Philip. The beast refused to be ridden by anyone. As the crowd gave up, Alexander stepped forward. He noticed the horse was afraid of its own shadow. With calm and confidence, he mounted and tamed it. Philip was deeply moved. He kissed his son on the head and said, "My boy, you must find a kingdom big enough for your ambitions." Alexander named the horse Bucephalus, meaning ox head. It would become his loyal steed for many years in battle. At age 13, Philip entrusted Alexander's education to one of the greatest minds of all time, Aristotle. This philosopher had founded numerous schools and authored works on everything from physics and biology to politics, rhetoric, and ethics. Aristotle's teachings shaped Western thought for centuries, and Alexander had the rare privilege of being his pupil. Alexander and other noble youths were taught at the Temple of the Nymphs at Mysa, essentially a royal boarding school. Among his classmates were Ptolemy, Hephaestion, and Cassander, who would later become his trusted generals. Together, they were known as the Companions. Under Aristotle, Alexander developed a deep love for Greek literature, especially Homer's Iliad. Aristotle gave him a personalized annotated copy, which Alexander carried with him on every campaign. During his youth, Alexander also met Persian exiles at the Macedonian court. These connections gave him valuable insight into the Persian Empire, insight that may have influenced Macedonian strategy and governance in years to come. At 16, Alexander's formal education ended, and he was thrust into command. Philip assigned him a small force and sent him to suppress revolts in the kingdom. He proved capable in battle, gaining both experience and loyalty. But tensions rose at home. When Philip took a new wife and distanced himself from Olympias, Alexander was enraged and left Macedon, only to return months later. Though admired and talented, Alexander was not yet guaranteed to inherit the throne. Then, at a royal celebration, King Philip was assassinated. Alexander acted swiftly. He eliminated every rival claimant and consolidated power. Philip's death sparked rebellion throughout Greece. But Alexander crushed each uprising, traveling city to city. In doing so, he was recognized as the new leader of the Greek world, a title once held by his father. War with Persia had long been anticipated. Now, Greece placed its hope in a 20-year-old king and the veteran army his father had built, and in 334 BC, Alexander led that army across the Hellespont into Asia Minor. The world was about to change forever. Alexander's campaign into Persia was met with resistance right from the beginning. As he pushed into Asia Minor, the Persians debated how to respond. One general urged a scorched earth tactic, burning crops and denying Alexander's army any supplies. But the local Persian satrap refused. He would not see his province reduced to ashes. Instead, he chose to make a stand at the Granicus River. There, Alexander's forces encountered a large Persian army, 10,000 cavalry and 10,000 Greek mercenaries. The two sides were divided by a shallow river. Without hesitation, Alexander led a charge across the water with his elite companion cavalry. The crossing was chaotic, and the resistance fierce. During the melee, Alexander was struck in the head, his helmet shattered by a sword. Bleeding, he drove his lance through the attacker, only to be ambushed from behind. A Persian soldier raised his sword to kill him, but a loyal companion sliced off the man's arm just in time. The rest of the Macedonian phalanx poured across the river. Overwhelmed, the Persian cavalry retreated. The mercenaries, unable to engage in time, were surrounded and slaughtered. It was Alexander's first great victory, but Persia was vast. Alexander moved swiftly through Asia Minor, capturing cities that offered little resistance. His advance threatened Persian naval supply lines, so he targeted strategic ports. The city of Miletus held out fiercely, but eventually fell. At Gordium, Alexander encountered the famous Gordian knot, a tangled rope said to be impossible to untie. Legend claimed that whoever could unravel it would rule all of Asia. Alexander simply drew his sword and cut it in half. 18 months into his campaign, Alexander reached Syria. Unbeknownst to him, the Persian king, Darius III, was preparing a massive counterattack. With an army nearly twice the size of Alexander's, Darius blocked the only route out of Syria. The armies clashed at Issus, a narrow strip of land between mountains and sea, favoring Alexander's smaller, more mobile force.